Hello there, and then welcome to a brand new video. This is Happy Beyond Numbers, where we learn maths the easy. We are still on data presentation, and this time we are looking at a histogram. We did the bar graph initially, and then I paused to look at the class interval, and then the class boundary, and then the class mark, because we need that for this. If you don't know how to get your intervals and then boundaries and then the mark, you really have to go back to that before you come to this video, because we're going to apply the table we used over there. Now let's quickly go into it. A histogram is a graphical representation of numerical data using bars of different heights. It is just like the bar chart, just like it. We also we gave this same definition for the bar chart. But there are some key differences. The first one is that for the bar chart, they compare categories. So the bar chart is used to compare categories. But then the histogram, on the other hand, is used to compare ranges, range of data. So let's say group data. That is where we need histograms. And that is why we had to do the class boundaries and then the class mark. Now, this is just an example of how it is important to note the key differences. So on the bar, you see that there are spaces between all of this, but for the histogram, we don't have spaces, you see. And you have your frequencies over here. On the bar, you have your categories here, but on the histogram, we put our class boundaries or our class mark over here. Then one last thing we need here is what we call the axis break symbol over here, right? It is called the axis break symbol or the frequency polygon break. You see, we use that to indicate that there is a gap from 0 to your first point over here. You see, there's a gap from 0 to the first point over here. As I always say, let's learn by practicing. So we have some table we'll be using to practice how to get a histogram. Now, if you quite remember, this is the table we came up with when we're looking at the class boundaries and then the class mark. And this is the same table we want to draw a histogram on. If you don't know how to draw this table, this is your data over here. And then let me give a quick overview. So we need our class intervals, right? We've done all in the previous video. We need our class interval, then you come for your tally, your frequency, then your class boundaries. And how did we say we get to the class boundaries? 0.5 minus the lower, 0.5 plus the upper. So with that in mind, we had 40 minus 0.5, 49 minus 0.5. We did for all till 90 minus 0.5, and then 100 plus 0.5. Then we get our class mark by adding this upper and then the lower, then we divide it by 2. So let's go to the main thing we want to do in this video. And to do that, you need your graph sheet, your pencil, and then your ruler. So this is what I have here as my graph. And as usual, we need our x-axis and then our y-axis. Then we need to label them as well. Now, if you look at our data over here, here's the data we want to use. And it is the data showing the marks of an examination, right? The marks of an examination conducted in a class. So we have our frequency, which is just going to be the number of students, right? So I'll write the number of students on the y-axis. Let me quickly do that. So this is what I have here. I'm going to put my number of students over here. Then for the frequency, if you take a look at what we have here, the highest frequency is 7, right? So you should be able to span them out so that your highest would also be shown within your range. Hence, I'm going to let every box represent 1. What do I mean by I'm going to do that? After every box, I'm going to skip in ones. So I have my 1 here, and I'm going to get a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, 7, 8, and then 9 and 10, though we don't even have a frequency of 10. But I've made sure I have my 7 over here. Then we come to the x-axis. Now, the x-axis is one of the most important things, right? So on the x-axis, we can either put our class boundary or the class mark. So I would first of all walk us through how to use the class boundary. If we finish with the class boundary, we'll now come to what? The class mark. To use the class boundary, you would realize that the upper class boundary here is the lower class boundary of the next one. The upper class boundary of this is the lower class boundary of this. So that is just the trick. Starting from our 0. So we know our 0 is over here. We have skipped so many numbers. And then our first number here, I wouldn't bring it here, but then I'll write it over here. It's going to be what? 39.5. 39.5. So I'll put my 39.5 over there. After which I look at the width of, or how many boxes am I going to use to represent each class boundary. I want my work to span my graph nicely. Hence, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we have 6, and I'm going to use 2 boxes, and I can get 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. It spans very, very nicely, right? So we now come and then continue. We had a 39.5 over here. So we are just going to continue with our 49.5. Then the next one goes with 59.5. Then in that order. So you just continue. And that's what? 99.5, which is our last number on the table. Right? So now that we have everything, let's label the X as well. So this time around, we're using class boundaries. Right? We are using class boundaries. So I'm going to get the class boundaries from here, and I'll just come and then put it right here. So I've labeled my axis. I have my class boundaries here, and then the number of students over here. Now what is left is for us to what? Plot our bar or our histogram. You see? So we go and then check for each class boundary. For the very first one, which was 39.5 to 49.5, we had a frequency of 3. You see? So we come over here on our graph, and then we plot that of the 3. Then how do we do that? We project from this point. You know, we started our boundaries from here, right? So we are going to project from this point and then let it reach where we have our 3. And then you just continue this way. With this, we can quickly check on the next class boundary. And that is that of what? 49.5 to 59.5. They had a 6. So we come here and then illustrate that as well. So we move from this point all the way up to 6. You use your ruler to do this illustration. The next one also gave us 7. So we just continue this way. Now for the next one also, we have a 6. So we have 6 here, followed by a 5. And then the last one being a 3. And that is all for our histogram. You see, so unlike the graph, the histogram has no space in it. And it has this over here as well. This breaks over here. And you are done. So you can choose to put patterns inside if you wish. Now, we now put our title as usual over there. So I would say a histogram. So I'm just going to say histogram showing the score of students and then its frequency. All right, just give it a descriptive name so that anyone who takes your work will be able to tell what your histogram is about. So this is how it is going to be if we are to use the class boundaries, right? Now, it is no different if we are to use the class mark. The only thing is, for the class boundary, we made sure each boundary of our bar had the what? The upper limit and then the lower limit, you see. But if you want to use the class mark, so all we need to do is to clean this from here. So if you want to use the class mark, then that one, you know, the class mark is the midpoint of the class boundaries, the upper and then the lower, that is to say. So looking at the data we had over here, right? For the very first one, the class mark was what? 44.5. So we come here and then we make sure we write the 44.5 in the middle. You are not writing it at the edges or the vertices of the bars. No, but rather in the middle. So I put the 44.5 over here. Then the 45.5 also follows. You notice how I'm placing it in the middle. So you do the same for all. 74.5, your 84.5, and then finally the 94.5. This is how we get our our histogram, if we are to use the class mark. You see, and as I said earlier on, nothing changes in your drawing. It is just the labeling here, right? Okay. So I do hope you understand all that we've done so far. I would leave one last exercise that is on the previous one. Yeah, so this question here from the previous one. If you're able to draw the table for it, then you can as well just use the table you used to give us a histogram. So you have to do two. The first one, you use the class mark. Then the second one, you also use your class boundaries. I do hope this video was helpful. If it was and you want to receive more of this, you can just choose to subscribe so that anytime I release a video, you would be notified. Stay blessed and then see you in our next video. Bye.